In this video, I am going to talk about Arthur Miller's play A View from the Bridge, Act 1. I will start with Act 1, Scene 1. The first scene of the play is Alfieri's ruminative, quizzical introduction. It serves to connect Alfieri with the local Brooklyn community, but we are also reminded of his social and professional distance from the people he serves. This play is a view of Red Hook from Brooklyn Bridge, a survey from a superior and alien standpoint of the values of a close-knit community. Alfieri was born in Italy, he is of these people, but he is distanced from them. Now we are quite civilized, quite American. He insists that Red Hook is not Sicily, and yet not long ago violent deeds were committed on these streets, similar to those of the Sicilian gangs. A significant theme in the play is the importance of the rule of law and the contrasts in opinion between cultures as to the definition of a criminal act and the recognition of representatives of legal authority. Alfieri represents a conventional idea of law which is rational, codified and explicit. Rationality and objectivity were attributes of Greek thinking which were opposed by the Carthaginians, who are seen in the play as enemies of law and order. Al Capone, 1899–1947, the gangster who flourished in the 1920s, is here taken to be a representative of that lawlessness. Yet there is a paradox, even among gangsters there remains a notion of justice, which appears ambiguously related to law. Alfieri is glad that gangsterism has been defeated, yet there is a hint of compromise in his admission that now we settle for half. It is a phrase he repeats in his final speech. Does it mean that the humdrum processes of law cannot approach the ideal of absolute justice? Does it mean that absolute justice is accompanied by a manifestation of divine anger with human imperfection which human beings would rather not contemplate? In this apparent mismatch between law and justice, in the suggestion that there could be those who are justly shot by unjust men, there lies a thought that the conventional idea of law may not be enough. In addition to setting the audience an intellectual puzzle, Alfieri sets the scene and introduces the main character, openly suggesting that Eddie Carbone this one is a modern instance of a universal type and that his story will end in bloodshed. The speech is cleverly written. Some of its lines clearly belong to the elaborate cadenced verse in which it was originally written for the one-act version. But this elaborateness grows naturally from its colloquial opening. It suggests the balance which Miller has tried to strike between the naturalistic and the symbolic. In some sense, Miller tells us, what we are about to see is a modern instance of a perennial tale which is not about an individual but about permanent aspects of mankind. Act I, Scene 2, the second scene takes us into Eddie's apartment. Alfieri's language has been wide-ranging, meditative, extended, complex in structure, the speech of an educated man. He is, of course, consciously addressing the audience, and, although his tone is initially colloquial, his status as a lawyer and his role as a commentator compel him to be formal. The language of Eddie, Catherine and Beatrice is quick, spontaneous and conversational. It is the unpolished vernacular of the working class, used in privacy. It implies more than it states, unsophisticated on the surface. Its currents run deep. Its abrupt simplicity hides unutter depths of feeling, which are more likely to be revealed in the gestures and body language of the characters than in the obvious meaning of the words spoken. There is no direction in the script about the amount of physical contact there might be between Eddie and Catherine, for example, but there is no doubt about the vibrancy of Catherine's greeting to Eddie, and none about the eagerness with which she displays herself to him. The first part of the scene is devoted to Eddie and Catherine, and immediately currents of attraction and dissension are set up. There is no doubt how much Catherine values Eddie's approval, but, reading the speech with hindsight, as we must do, seeing the future presaged by the present, we notice the anxiety behind her ecstatic welcome of him. Catherine changed in dress and appearance, he sees her as the college girl, approaching the ideal he has had for her. His reference to her dead mother gives his appraisal of her an almost paternal note. His pleasure in her appearance, with an exact and detailed scrutiny of her dress, goes along with a fear of its effect on other men. Compliments and his first extended speech. Suddenly, he sees her in her new dress and shoes as an irresistible attraction, which he can graphically express in the simplest of metaphors. The clack of the shoes and the turning of the heads seem part of one machine, as if Catherine were playing into the hands of the men who will pursue her. The suggestion is implicit in Eddie's words, even if they do not express it. When he again raises questions about Catherine's appearance and behavior, he once more alludes to her dead mother, emphasizing his sense of responsibility for her and her own immaturity. One of them girls that went to college is also a baby who does not understand these things and yet is getting a big girl now. Eddie sends contradictory messages to Catherine, warning her about other men, but excluding himself from the warning. Catherine's careful preparations for telling Eddie her news are swamped in the news that he brings himself. Beatrice's entrance was to have been the signal for Catherine to speak. Now she listens to Eddie. Miller has cleverly shown us Catherine's uncertainty about what Eddie wants from her. He has shown her dependence on him, and also the frustration this causes her. But Miller postpones any further development of this theme. Now Beatrice and Eddie are the focus of attention. Perhaps it is a mark of Catherine's generosity of spirit that she completely forgets herself in her sympathy with Beatrice. Now Eddie is the confident master of the situation. He has no doubt about the security of the arrangements which have been made for the new arrivals. He is expansive, brushing aside difficulties. Beatrice is flustered and anxious, guiltily conscious of her shortcomings as a provider, forgetting how little these shortcomings will matter to the new arrivals. She is deeply thankful for their safe arrival. Her strong sense of family is evident, but her generosity may be Eddie's loss. He jokes about the sacrifices he has previously made for her family, but there is a tension in their conversation which points to a hidden uneasiness. We scarcely expect Beatrice to say that it is Eddie she is worried about, unless she is unsure about his feelings. His jokes about her generosity unsettle her. Can he really imagine himself in the immigrants' shoes? There is something abstract about the honor he feels in helping them. He can sympathize with their plight, but the unthinking generosity of Beatrice's response may come from too big a heart. What are the limits of this man's kindness to strangers? There is further evidence of Eddie's prickliness when Catherine's news is finally broken by Beatrice, not by Catherine herself. The suddenness of it takes him by surprise. Catherine has failed to get his permission first. His reluctance to get excited survives her recital of the wholly favorable sequence of events which have led to the offer. Only the mention of her salary injects a note of excitement, as if he were seeing her in a new light as an adult wage earner. But she is being drawn into a neighborhood and into a social position which Eddie does not think is good enough for her. His intention is that she get on. What he has groomed her for is success in the wealthy competitive world, not in the lower echelons of which he is a part. In the sequence that follows, Beatrice and Eddie are alone for the first time. Beatrice's surprising analysis is that the effect of Eddie's ambition for his niece is to keep her at home. If nothing is good enough for her, she stays as an honor. It is success. Beatrice has put her finger on Eddie's perverse reluctance to be satisfied. He reacts angrily when she asks him he means to keep Catherine in the house her life, first glancing thrust at his possessiveness. Persuaded, softens the Magdalene. Now Catherine is the Madonna type, too purely tainted by the company she might keep. In giving her his permission, his tone and gestures suggest new levels of shared intimacy. Now the actors must reveal the unself-conscious trust and affection they have felt for one another in the past. Even Eddie protects himself with smiles and unconvincing attempts at rough masculine incomprehension. For Catherine, future opening up which will free her generous spirit, but for himself Eddie foresees only loss. Now his paradoxes appear awkward contradictions. Catherine has learned bad from her good aunt, and most people ain't people. The relaxed warmth of love within the family is at risk if it is to the world, which is eager to dishonor and destroy it. Once again, It is contradictory to see the world both as a source of as the place where value is destroyed. For a moment Beatrice changes the mood by allowing Eddie to romanticize the world of work he just presented in such harsh terms. The coffee that Eddie can like flowers, even if there may be spiders amongst it. Now the atmosphere on stage is mellower as the pleasures and romance are acknowledged. Anxieties about Catherine shade off into less intense anxieties about the immigrant cousins, but there is a continuity of theme. The cousins will be safe, provided they remain within the protection of the family, which will conceal their presence from the outside world by a wall of silence. Above all, they are not to be talked about. People who see them can draw what conclusions they please. At this point, the foundation parable, as it were, of the play is told, the story of the boy who snitched, a word which evokes the horror children have of a broken rule or a secret betrayed. Beatrice tells the tale, conveying the horror of the breach of the unwritten code which community has adopted for the preservation of its own, and they spit on him in the street, his own father and his brothers. The whole neighborhood was crying. Beatrice's words have an almost biblical simplicity as they suggest the absolute revulsion of the group for the individual who has betrayed it. But Eddie reveals another side to Beatrice's picture of pure group loyalty. These breaches of the immigration laws are in fact based on a sophisticated of bribery. The syndicate which finds the immigrants' work concerned with them only while they pay off the debts they have incurred in being introduced to the country. Group loyalty is adulterated by greed and racketeering. In the episodes we have just considered, two of the major themes of the play have been initiated and cleverly alternated. First, Eddie's relationship with Catherine. Second, the relationships between immigrants who have already settled in America and those who wish to enter the country illegally. The second is not unconnected with the first. The first is simply an instance of the primal group, the family. The second raises the question of how extended that group can become. For Beatrice, it seems, the claims of blood, however remote, are paramount. Eddie is more aware of the need to compete. He is more aware, perhaps too aware, of boundaries, beyond which other men are enemies. The rest of the scene forms a tiny coda to what has gone before, reinforcing our perception of the poignant sense of attachment and loss Eddie feels for Catherine. Even as he gives her his blessing, they are still eagerly playing games of mutual dependence, as she runs to fetch him his cigar, a rather faint symbol of his masculine power. Left alone for a moment with Beatrice, we observe the tension between them and the anger that Beatrice has not yet been able to express or even to understand. Alfieri closes the scene with a comment which ignores these complexities. From the outside, Eddie is an average citizen. And so he introduces the next scene, in which the immigrants arrive. Act 1, Scene 3. Even as the cousins enter, we notice the differences between them. Marco is reserved, Rodolfo is exuberant and excitable, as well as egotistic. It is Marco who takes charge, establishing his relationship with Beatrice by recognizing the tie of blood. It is she who makes the introductions, naming each time her relationship to the person she introduces. Marco is carefully profuse with his thanks, deferring to Eddie's right to determine how long they will stay. He instantly grasps the problems they might cause their hosts, looking forward to the time when they can have a place of their own. Catherine lingers to wonder at the physical differences between the cousins, but Eddie cuts her off sharply enough to hurt, and takes over the conversation from his rocking chair, steering it away from Rodolfo's looks to the practicalities of their journey and the work they mean to do. Their cultural differences are immediately obvious. Neither side understands the other's way of life. Rodolfo tries to convey what it is like to live in Italy, drawing the women back into the conversation. In contrast to Eddie's poverty of expression, which conceals feeling under everyday talk, Rodolfo's language is alive with detail. The simple metaphors he uses are vivid enough to make his talk seem different from the work-oriented world of the Carbones. When Beatrice appeals to Eddie to share in the world Rodolfo is evoking, with a "how do you like that?" which is the best she can manage to express her pleased surprise. Eddie switches to Marco with a question about the length of their stay. While Rodolfo's sketch of Italy has been comic, Marco expresses the distress of bringing up a family in poverty and the pain of leaving them behind. Marco speaks simply, directly, warmly, the power of his feeling contained by the formality of his manners. His reticence is in marked contrast to Rodolfo's mercurial spontaneity. Both men are overjoyed when they realize how much money they will earn, and Marco's emotion at the possibility of helping his family is heartfelt. Already, Beatrice and he are on first-name terms. Now, he wants to thank Eddie, and for the first time he addresses him with a formal Italian version of his name. But Eddie brushes his thanks aside with a question about the coffee, which is used throughout this episode as a way of diverting attention from any seriously threatening feeling. This scene emphasizes the differences between Eddie and Beatrice. She is warm, sympathetic, imaginative; he is manly, objective, distanced, asking questions which are unsettling, if not threatening. Now Catherine directs the conversation back to Rodolfo, giving him the chance to offer views of his naive dream world. Asking him if he is married suggests her own unguarded impulsiveness. Obviously, she thinks he is attractive. He is confused, imagining himself rich, but not able to see himself as more than a message boy. Even Eddie is drawn into Rodolfo's imaginative world, though he is disconcerted to find that Rodolfo is also a singer. Notice how tactfully Beatrice goes for the coffee, leaving Catherine to listen to Rodolfo's tale. Catherine is silent as Rodolfo imagines his triumphs as a messenger on a motorcycle and recalls his success as a singer. When he exaggerates, Marco is there to correct him, gently but firmly. When Catherine finds that Rodolfo likes jazz and popular American songs, her enthusiasm reaches a peak. But once more Eddie, ignoring her, brutally destroys the romantic mood Rodolfo has created. His song of romantic possessiveness is uncomfortably relevant to the relationship between Eddie and Catherine. We have been given enough insight into Eddie's reluctance to let her go to believe that she might well be seen as the paper doll he does not intend to let other fellows steal. Brutally cutting through Catherine's excitement, Eddie tries to frighten Rodolfo with the possibility of exposure. It is Marco who rises to quieten Rodolfo. Eddie's "they got guys all over the place" is the first vague threat that someone may report their presence in the house. Eddie has regained the initiative. He has silenced Rodolfo. Now he criticizes Catherine's new shoes, suddenly making an issue of what she has been wearing since he arrived home. These are the shoes that he feared would make men's heads turn. That he criticizes them now is a clear sign that he has seen the flash of sexual attraction between Catherine and Rodolfo, and it has made him angry. His attempt at humiliating her does not affect Rodolfo. His line, when Beatrice finally produces the coffee, is "Sugar. Yes. I like sugar very much," the words of an innocent sensualist to whom none of the pleasures of life is alien. As Catherine adds the sugar to his coffee, a bond is sealed between them, and the moment is not lost on Rodolfo. By this point, Miller has begun to develop the two main strands of dramatic action in the play. The more difficult the relationship between Eddie and Catherine is, the more carefully handled. The letting go of a child is not an unfamiliar situation, but Eddie's feelings seem stronger than is usual. Beatrice's comments on his attitude suggest a conflict within her which is yet to be developed. And there is a further conflict within Eddie himself. He wants Catherine to justify his life by realizing his rather vague social aspirations, but he also wants her to remain where she is. The second strand of the action is what will happen to the immigrants. The possibility of their betrayal, however unthinkable it may be, is signaled in the second and third scenes of the play. Eddie's feelings about them are in conflict. He is himself the son of an immigrant, but he has been completely assimilated into his new milieu. He has no obvious interests outside work and family, he responds to none of the invitations to play baseball with his neighbors, and he has no contact with the musical culture of Italy. His duty to the cousins comes through Beatrice. He feels no sense of kinship with either of them. When Rodolfo admires Catherine, the two strands of the action dangerously touch. Act 1, Scene 4. In his introduction to the fourth scene of the play, Alfieri's language bears further traces of the elevated language of the original one-act play. Here he is most obviously acting as the chorus of a tragedy, one of whose conventional themes was the undesirability of deviating from the common lot. The scene is broken into 3 or 4 episodes. The first is a dialogue between Eddie and Beatrice. She is relaxed, philosophical, even fatalistic when the possibility of the cousins' discovery is raised once more. Clearly, the relationship between Rodolfo and Catherine has moved on, and Eddie is troubled. He is fretting that the young people have not returned home, although we may think that 8 o'clock is not late for an evening's outing to the cinema. Beatrice's attitude to the young people is very different from Eddie's. She sees only Rodolfo's positive qualities: his good looks, his capacity for hard work. She is sympathetic to the fact that Catherine is too excited about Rodolfo to put all her energy into her new job. Miller has written Beatrice's speeches here so that she can project relaxation and ease. It is as if she is trying to soothe Eddie into unconcern. Notice how much repetition there is in the speeches, and how Eddie repeats Beatrice's phrases with a different tone, matching her assurance with pessimism and concern. What worries Eddie is Rodolfo's lack of conformity. There is something odd, almost unnatural about his tendency to burst into song. Indeed, singing itself seems almost incomprehensible. A whole song comes out of his mouth with motions. There is something disgusting about Rodolfo's willingness to expose himself to the mockery of the men on the dockyards. Words such as weird, canary, paper doll, applied to Rodolfo himself, suggest the doubt about Rodolfo's masculinity which is to become Eddie's main charge against him. Rodolfo is like a chorus girl or something, and his hair may be bleached or dyed. As Eddie makes these suggestions, Beatrice's tone changes sharply, just at the point where she says, "You crazy or something?" At that point her voice has a new intensity, an edge of criticism we have not heard before, as she turns these charges against Eddie himself. She nips his aggressiveness in the bud, first by refusing to agree with him, then by turning the conversation to their own relationship. Once more, the depth of expression here depends on the tone which the actress uses. Miller's words are vague, even banal. The terrible phrase, "When am I gonna be a wife again, Eddie?" characteristically emphasizes Beatrice's relationship to Eddie and the rights that go with it. The question is direct and uncompromising, but it has no hint of hostility. Beatrice is wounded and reproachful, but she does not lose her dignity. Eddie's faint attempts to explain his loss of interest in sex lead back to the cousins and to Catherine. He don't feel good. But to Beatrice's direct question, "You don't like me, hey?" he responds with incomprehension. The poverty of the language used here does not conceal the seriousness of the breach in the relationship, but it fails to explain it. It clearly shows how ignorant Eddie is about himself and how stubborn he is in his refusal to admit that anything is wrong. It also shows what limits there are to Beatrice's power. However impressive she may be to the audience, she cannot break through Eddie's self-absorption. He keeps talking about the unsuitability of Rodolfo's interest in Catherine, whereas Beatrice wants to talk about the impropriety of his own. But her words are too imprecise to make the point, and she has to be content with such phrases as "I don't like it" and "it ain't nice," without specifying what it is that she means. The encounter that follows is an odd one. For the first time there is real contact between Eddie and his neighbors. As we have come to expect, the conversation is elliptical and elusive, pointing to possibilities which the speakers cannot put into words. Its teasing is open-ended, leaving the work of understanding to the audience. Miller divides the little scene between Louis and Mike, allowing Louis to initiate the conversation but leaving its disquieting development to Mike. The force of the scene arises from the unease it produces in Eddie. There is, first, the suggestion that the immigrants get work more easily than the residents. There is, of course, an allusion here to the manipulation of the allocation of jobs and the payoff which the manipulators expect from it. The men's simple-minded comments about Marco and Rodolfo echo Eddie's earlier opinions, though they are milder in tone. Their inarticulate attempts to describe Rodolfo are ambivalent. The sense of humor they praise in him makes them behave oddly, as if his unconventionality rouses feelings they cannot handle. It is not clear whether he is being laughed with or laughed at. The intensity of their hysteria has a touch of malice which embarrasses Eddie, and may puzzle the audience. It is just enough to raise the temperature for Rodolfo's return. In the third little section of the scene, Catherine and Rodolfo cap the laughter of the longshoremen with their own excited laughter. They have not so far broken bounds by going across the bridge to Manhattan, though this is what Rodolfo wants to do. The mood of pleasure which Catherine and Rodolfo share is vulnerable to the easily aroused hostility between Catherine and Eddie. Interested only in where she has been and in what she has been doing, Eddie is quick to be censorious. He is incapable of entering imaginatively into the naive picture that Rodolfo has of New York, as he projects the assumptions of Italy onto the landscape of New York, which is for him a bright world of theater and opera, while for Eddie it is a world of danger. Rodolfo's fantasies and memories are meaningless to Eddie, who is interested only in Catherine and the unfulfilled claims he has on her. He is looking for the little girl he has lost. She is looking for his approval of the young woman she has become. These cross-purposes breed hostility. When Eddie accuses her of not listening to him anymore, there is a wistful exchange between them, which consists of virtually the same repeated phrase, Catherine: "What's the matter? You don't like him?" Slight pause, Eddie turns to her, "You like him, Katie?" Catherine, with a blush but holding her ground, "Yeah. I like him." Eddie, his smile goes, "You like him?" Catherine, looking down, "Yeah." Moments like this are of great significance. Inarticulate characters do not communicate in explicit language. Yet this is an act of quiet self-assertion on Catherine's part. The effort which it costs her has to be expressed in her tone of voice and the body language she uses, including her distance from Eddie and her eye contact with him, which Miller has suggested in the stage directions. Catherine's shy admission of an interest in Rodolfo, quite different, we may guess, from any she has previously felt for a man, signals a break with Eddie. When she follows up with "You're like a father to him," it is a reminder of the gap between them, which he keeps trying to annul. What is now required of him is that he should give the girl he has brought up as his daughter to a younger man, but he refuses to see Rodolfo as a man of goodwill. Rodolfo's friendly overtures are ignored. Catherine's positive reports of his gratitude and of his respect for her are rebuffed with contempt. Glibly rationalizing his possessive feelings, Eddie offers sketch of completely self-interested Rodolfo, oblivious of his relatives at home and prepared to deceive Catherine in order to become an American citizen. His picture is based on a highly selective number of facts and finds no echo in Catherine's experience. Any reply that Catherine offers is swiftly incorporated into Eddie's view of Rodolfo's intentions. Now, Rodolfo is a member of an out-group, an untrustworthy they, who ruthlessly exploit the opportunities available to them in new country. The two themes of the play, incest and immigration, have become even more explosively embroiled. This exchange between Catherine and Eddie has great force. It repeats the movement of the first episode in the scene between Eddie and Beatrice, beginning with relaxed banter which becomes more tense as the conflict between the characters is exposed. It divides into three movements. At first Catherine is dominant, quietly asserting her love for Rodolfo, but when she asks Eddie what he has against the young man, she allows him to build up a formidable, if purely hypothetical, case against him. Where Catherine sees love and affection, Eddie sees ruthless calculation. The irreconcilability of their respective positions becomes clear and brings the sharpest conflict yet between them, a rapid flurry of verbal blows, of assertions and denials. Catherine does her best to shut out Eddie's view of things. He is pierced by her desperate assertion of Rodolfo's love for her. At the end of the encounter, Catherine is in retreat, but Eddie is exhausted. When he turns to Beatrice for support, expecting her to straighten Catherine out, he meets another accusation. When are you going to leave her alone? On the face of it, the words are unexceptionable. It is the vague, non-analytic language that we have come to expect from this household. When Beatrice follows up with "Or you gonna drive me crazy?" it is clear that her desperation springs from something more deeply personal than concern for her niece. For a moment, she is the wounded and neglected wife accusing her husband of unwelcome attentions to another woman. Once again, she and Eddie fail to communicate. She is registering anger and alarm at Eddie's behavior, though she cannot find words to explain what she thinks is wrong. He can concentrate on judging Rodolfo, completely closed to the idea that it is his own behavior which is in question. The stage direction tells us that Eddie walks out of the house in guilt, but are we to suppose he has a clear idea of the nature of his guilt? In the episode that ends this scene, Beatrice and Catherine are left to confront one another. For the first time in the play, insight, self-knowledge and rationality replace blind instinct. There is a striking change in tone. Beatrice is searching but compassionate. Catherine becomes painfully aware of the strong sentiment which continues to bind her to Eddie. Perhaps for the first time, we learn that the attachment between them is not one-sided. When Catherine asks, "What am I going to do? Just kick him in the face with it," the stage direction suggests she speak the line as one who herself is trying to rationalize a buried impulse. We may infer that this means that Catherine wants to break free, and is secretly prepared to respond with violence to Eddie's assertion of parental rights over her. On the other hand, the buried impulse may be quite different. To imply that her love for Rodolfo will be like a kick in the face is perhaps to suggest that she does not want to hurt Eddie by admitting her love for Rodolfo. Perhaps her feelings for Eddie have deeper roots than she is aware of. Or perhaps she is unwilling to relinquish the comfort that the relationship gives her. Beatrice has no doubt about Eddie's inability to let Catherine go. She has already, in the first scene of the play, patiently catalogued the excuses Eddie has found for preventing Catherine's leaving home. Now she begins by gently encouraging Catherine to choose for herself and to be firmly self-assertive, but she grows less patient as she tries to expose the mutually satisfying, but wholly immature, bond that links uncle and niece. It is not surprising that her closely detailed list of occasions when Catherine has forgotten she is no longer a child begins to sound, even to herself, like jealousy. The audience must be acutely aware of the keenness with which Beatrice must have observed the sexual undertones of Catherine's intimacy with Eddie. Catherine's confused acceptance of the new knowledge Beatrice gives her is genuine enough, but her lack of insight into her own behavior seems to mark a reluctance to begin a more adult phase of life. To cling to a substitute father may be safer than to throw in her lot with an attractive, but imperfectly known, lover. Beatrice's role in this scene is impressive. She is wiser, more experienced, yet gently sympathetic to the girl whom she recognizes as a serious rival for her husband's affection. But behind the gentleness is a deep determination that Catherine should release them both from the stifling effects of Eddie's obsession. Perhaps for the first time in the action, language is used with a precise communicative force. Beatrice's "honey, you gotta" is lucid and determined. Catherine is not to be allowed to cling to Eddie. She must say farewell to her emotional dependency and embrace her new life with strength and dignity. Act 1, Scene 5. In the next scene, Alfieri adopts a new role by taking part in the action, but his introductory words help to reinforce the last impression we had of Eddie. His eyes were like tunnels. My first thought was that he had committed the crime, but soon I saw it was only a passion that moved into his body, like a stranger. The first phrase of these lines was in the one-act version of the play where it read, "The eyes look like tunnels leading back towards some ancestral beach where all of us once lived." In that context, Eddie's eyes remind us of the long history of human tragedy and of the deep-rooted human emotions from which it springs. In the new context, it can only suggest the narrowness of Eddie's obsessions. Perhaps we are meant to notice that an unimaginative lawyer may think it is less troubling that a man should be possessed by demons than that he should have committed the crime. That Eddie has long been taken over by a passion suggests that his self-ignorance has moved into a deeper and more dangerous phase. Now, Eddie's claim to know Rodolfo's intentions is insistent. His line, "I know what's in his mind," must surely be uttered with force enough to frighten. In this state of certainty he attempts to persuade the skeptical lawyer that his suppositions are facts. He argues that illegal immigrants save their money because they fear discovery, but Rodolfo spends freely. This suggests that he has no fear of deportation, because he knows he will marry. Alfieri is unimpressed. There is nothing illegal about an intention to marry an established citizen. There is, of course, a complete contrast. Eddie and Alfieri, one is insistent, emotional, anxious to persuade, the other is calm, rational, analytic. Even in this scene, we are presented with a contest. Eddie wants to use the lawyer as a substitute for the law itself. If he can convince Alfieri that he has a case, perhaps the law will be on his side. But Alfieri is not to be moved. Eddie cannot clothe his own prejudices in the objective force of law. Eddie's objections to Rodolfo are expressed in a torrent of emotion which finally suggests that it is Eddie, not Rodolfo, who is not right. To Rodolfo's blondness Eddie calls it platinum to make us think of brassy, Hollywood cover girls, and his physical frailty, his interest in music, his tenor voice. For Eddie, a sign of effeminacy, has now been added an interest in dressmaking. Disturbingly for Alfieri, who is moved to protest, Eddie finds Rodolfo attractive, if disgusting. "I mean, he looked so sweet there, like an angel. You could kiss him, he was so sweet." The words are contemptuous, but the thought expresses a wish we should not expect Eddie to entertain. He describes the derision his neighbors feel but fear to express, reminding us of Mike and Louie's excessive and ambiguous laughter. But what maddens him most is the thought of that guy laying his hands on her. Lurking obscurely is the unexpressed thought that Catherine is deserting a real man, Eddie, for a fake, Rodolfo. The passion which inhabits Eddie's body is a smoldering sexual jealousy which no insight illuminates. We know that what Eddie has put into words, the wild suggestion of the kiss, will be bizarrely enacted in a later scene. In this way Miller both prepares us for the later event, and marks a stage in the progression of Eddie's disintegration. What is now a thought will later be acted out. As Alfieri insists, the only legal sanction that exists to stop Rodolfo becoming Catherine's husband is the possibility of his arrest as an illegal immigrant. Eddie recoils from the slightest hint that he might betray the cousins, but his initial appearance of incomprehension and the strength of his denial suggest that his mind is divided. When Alfieri turns from questions of law, his advice echoes Beatrice's, more delicately than Beatrice. He suggests that Eddie's feelings for Catherine are excessive. He is careful to speak generally and impersonally. He stresses, with genuine understanding, how excessive feelings towards a loved one unaware of their implications can create serious emotional problems. From his own experience, Alfieri knows the pain of parting from a loved female child. The sexual nature of the bond is tacitly accepted, but those things have to end. A notable element of Alfieri's speeches is their sympathy and insight. He has abandoned the impersonal role of the lawyer. If anyone can come close to Eddie, perhaps it is this man. Eddie responds, but it is with a bitter self-pity. There is nothing individual or unusual about Eddie's tale. He has sacrificed himself for his child, and now he feels he is being robbed. Eddie's justification of his possessiveness is deeply unattractive. All the latent suspicion of the outsider boils over into hatred. Rodolfo has come out of nowhere. He has dirty, filthy hands. He is a goddamn thief. Eddie has reached the point where his easy liberalism roughly collides with his self-interest. When Alfieri begins to lose patience, driving home the impossibility of Eddie's desire for Catherine, Eddie abruptly refuses to listen. Just as the law has been deaf to the turmoil of Eddie's feelings, so he is deaf to Alfieri's exposition of the rules that govern the intimacy of relations between male and female family members. However banal Eddie's self-justifying outburst may appear in linguistic terms, it powerfully expresses the angry self-righteousness which marks his quasi-incestuous feelings. His emotions are rooted in a past for which he can never be compensated. The sacrifices he then made for Catherine have given him permanent right of possession over her. He has no idea that his cries of pain are unreasonable, all he knows is that his heart is broken. It is left to Alfieri, acting once again as a chorus, to confirm the spectator's view that such selfish ignorance must have evil consequences. Act I, Scene 6. The final scene in the first act takes place in the thoroughly domestic situation of Eddie's living room. The extended family has just finished dinner. It is as if the action had regressed to the earlier harmony of the night of the cousins' arrival. Once again Miller builds the scene towards a climax by dividing it into smaller segments. This easy, drifting domestic scene is tightened and focused by the spurts of Eddie's anger, touched off in each instance by Rodolfo. The scene begins casually, as Beatrice and Catherine clear the table. Catherine happily imagines what life has been like for Rodolfo in Italy. But she is sensitive to the unspoken skepticism of Eddie, who characteristically takes over the conversation. Soon it is men's talk about boats and nets and money. Only those who own the boats in Italy make money. Even in their own country Marco and Rodolfo have been excluded from work. For the Americans it is difficult to imagine such a different way of life. Beatrice grapples with the problem of imagining sardines as uncanned living fish. Catherine tries to think of the distant European countries the cousins have visited. The first note of anger is sounded when Eddie talks of the oranges he thinks may have been painted. In exposing his ignorance, Eddie reveals the depth of the cultural divide. Marco's reply is grave and formal, Rodolfo's has just enough edge to spark off Eddie's rage. Successfully heading off dispute, Beatrice steers the conversation back to the satisfaction Marco takes in providing his family with money. But underneath there is the pain of separation, scarcely mitigated by letters from home. Beatrice's sympathetic inquiries about Marco's family are spoiled by Eddie's coarse jokes about infidelity. Once again he challenges Rodolfo, when he contrasts Italian strictness with American freedom in the relations between the sexes. As Beatrice is quick to notice, it is Rodolfo he means when he talks of greenhorns who fail to understand the rules which govern the behavior of young people in America. As usual, Eddie exaggerates. Rodolfo didn't exactly drag Catherine off, but the inexact phrase, implying a brutality unthinkable in relation to Rodolfo, is meant to suggest the degree of consideration Eddie expects for himself. He is also forced into contradiction when he says, "I mean it might be a little more free here but it's just as strict." What he is trying to express is the fact that the rules of American behavior are signaled less obviously than those in Italy, but they operate with as much force. Tortuously and indirectly, the question of Catherine and Rodolfo's relationship is now being faced. Marco thinks it can be settled by their coming home earlier. Beatrice wants Catherine to stand up for herself. Eddie tries to enlist Marco's support in heading off Rodolfo. Once more he raises the specter of discovery and reminds them of the terms on which he accepted them. Both had come, in Eddie's view, to help Marco's family in Italy. He strongly implies that there is no place in America for an independent male who wants to make a life for himself. In the awkward pause that follows, Catherine makes her own response by putting on the record that has become Rodolfo's theme tune and asking him to dance. If Eddie thinks he has made a new contract with Marco about Rodolfo's behavior, he is mistaken. Supported by Beatrice, Catherine quietly asserts her own right to choose. The conversation uneasily reverts to the cousin's life in Italy, revealing Rodolfo's skill as a cook, another sign of what Eddie regards as his unmanliness, and leading rapidly to Eddie's counter-challenge. This time Eddie's words are more controlled. His ironic self-deprecation is in reality a mocking attack on Rodolfo, and his anger is expressed by the contemptuous ease with which he tears the rolled-up newspaper, as if it were a substitute for Rodolfo, the paper doll, himself. Now he tries to drive a wedge between the brothers. Rodolfo is unexpectedly addressed as Danish, as if he were not even a real Italian, and boxing is to be a final test of manliness, though it has not been a part of either brother's previous experience. The scene reaches a measured climax as Eddie lures Rodolfo into a trial of strength. Notice how Beatrice's initial suspicion of this aggression is converted an enthusiastic admiration of the camaraderie which is supposed to exist within the sport. The scene is played almost in slow motion as Eddie overcomes Rodolfo's reluctance even to feign aggression. Catherine picks up Beatrice's initial alarm, expressing it at a sharper level of anxiety. When Eddie's blow lands, only Rodolfo sees that it demands a response. Catherine rushes forward to defend her boy. Marco is not yet convinced that anything objectionable has happened. Beatrice is placatory. But Rodolfo has restarted the record and taken Catherine into his arms. Very slowly, Marco now responds to what he has decided has been an unfriendly act. In challenging Eddie to a trial of strength with the kitchen chair, he makes it clear that he is unshakably loyal to his brother, and that in any real contest between him and Eddie he would win. Once more, Miller carries the play forward by offering a modified version of the action which will follow. Now also, for the first time, we see the male strength of the Italians, which emerges without emotion to convince us of its reality. As Marco holds the chair above Eddie's head, there is no sense of threat, but merely a hint of the power which he could unleash if he chose to. This is the end of the article. I hope it was useful for you. Please, do not forget to click the notification bell, like, share, comment, subscribe my channel.